In this video, we are going to look at 10 of the most powerful mixing tips you can learn as a home producer. This is a difficult thing to put together because some mixing tips are more useful and fundamental than others, and to help me today, we have got one of our Accelerator alumni, Gustaf, aka Tempest, who is a superb mixing engineer. Now, some of you already know Gustaf from the EDM Tips community, and since working with us, he's been supported by DJs such as Nora En Pure, Nicky Romero, and has releases on EDX's label Syrup Records. So he really knows his stuff, and each of the tips he's going to share with you today has helped him go from being a beginner producer up to someone at the top of his game. So they're going to be very useful for you too. So let's welcome Gustaf.
Thank you so much, Will, for that introduction. It really is amazing to be officially part of the EDM Tips family. Before we jump into today's video, let me just recommend you to also download our completely free mixing guide that has our 30 most powerful tools when it comes to mixing. Keep this on your desktop and apply these steps when doing your mixes, and you'll instantly see better results in your mixes. The first tip is one that I think a lot of you already know, but not all of us actually use, and that is to properly use a reference track when mixing. So utilizing a song with the same type of key and element and vibe. So we simply drag our reference track into our DAW, into our dedicated reference track stem. And on this, I always have a couple of things already prepared for easy workflow. For example, for the first, we have a utility, which we pull down the gain with -12 dB, and this is to counteract the mastering that has already been done on the reference track, so we're not comparing apples with pears. After that, we have just a normal EQ that I've renamed to referencing roll-off, and this we use to take away any frequencies we're not working with at the moment. So if you're, for example, mixing low end, then you don't really need to hear anything above 500 Hertz. So why not take away everything else so you can focus and hear what you're actually working with? After that, we move into some more things I have on my stem. So the Ulean loudness meter, just to see what is happening in terms of loudness and LUFS. And then the most important one, which is the Voxengo span, which is a free plugin to show you the frequency spread in your song or in your reference track. So by utilizing the span, we can put one on our reference track and then pull up a different one from our master. And we compare the two between what is happening. And then we can make sure to hit the same frequencies in our song as we have in our reference track. My second tip is to utilize a thing called SoundID by Sonarworks. And just to be clear, we are not affiliated or sponsored in any way to say this, but for me, this thing really took my mixes and my production to a different level. So what exactly is SoundID? Well, you can see this as a calibration of your headphones and of your speakers. And why would we need this? Well, even the best speakers can't compensate for poorly treated room. SoundID and Sonarworks show this quite cool calibration chart here of how it looks like in the bass, in the mids, and the highs before calibration is done, and how it looks afterwards. And then there are two different versions that you can get of SoundID. Either the more expensive one, where you actually get one of their microphones, which you plug in to your audio interface, and then measure a couple of points, or a bunch, it's like 20 different points around your room to basically calibrate your speakers for the environment you're in. The second version you can get is the cheaper one, which is only for headphones. That one is around 99 euros. And then you get this standalone app and also an in the DAW app, which you can choose the specific profile for your headphones, and it will automatically calibrate your headphones to adjust, so it's more of a flat calibration. And let me then just show you how it looks inside Ableton. So you have this plugin, which is from SoundID, where you can then choose just the same thing as you can do in the standalone app. So you can choose between your studio monitors, or you can choose between your headphones, and it will automatically adjust for your calibration. So this is really something I recommend you looking into and consider investing in, because it will completely change your game, specifically when it comes to mixing and relying on your ears in a much better way. For my third tip, this is a really easy one, but one that I genuinely wish that I knew sooner. It would have saved me a lot of money and a lot of time and frustration in doing my projects. And it's simply that just because a plugin costs money, it doesn't mean it's better than the stock plugins in Ableton. Generally, in my productions, I tend to revert back to Ableton stock plugins for a lot of applications, rather than using the third-party plugins I have. This is truly because I just know them better. And it goes to show that the most important thing is to know your tools rather than spending thousands of dollars on plugins. Now, there are of course a couple of exemptions for this, and for example, synthesizers is one point where stock plugins might not be able to cut it, and here we have very good examples like Diva and Serum that are just general tools that everyone wants to have. But looking at, for example, compressors or EQs or saturation, a lot of that can be done with the stock plugins, and for most of the times you're gonna get as good of a result as if you went out and bought a saturation like FabFilter's Saturn for 100 euros. The most important thing is to know your plugins, not which plugin you have. For tip number 4, we're moving into one of the things that I can truly say was a pivotal point in my productions. I can see a clear line of my productions before I knew about this and after, and I preach this to all the people that I teach. And it is simply to separate your bass into 2 stems so that you have a separate and dedicated sub bass. Let's listen to it first, and then we'll go into tweaking this to have a separate sub bass. So, sure, it's a nice and neat low end as it is right now. And if we're looking at the bass, we have 1 bass track right now. But I do want to be able to control this a little bit more. I would like the upper frequencies of this bass to be a bit more wide while still keeping control of my sub end. And what I would usually do in this point of time is to just duplicate my bass track, rename this one to instead be sub bass. So since we're now doing a sub bass, we can look at our EQ for the other bass and basically take away up to, I would say around 180 on this one. So we're only getting the top frequencies here. And then in our sub bass, we can then go ahead and roll off a lot more of the high frequencies. So we're only getting a sub. And then we can tweak the presets. I have a favorite one that I always tend to go to, and it's this one, to get just a clean sub. And what is great about this is if we're feeling that we're lacking punch in the low end, then we can only bring up the sub instead of bringing up the entire bass. So let's listen to the full track now. For me, this sounds much better. And this is really one of the tips that I genuinely hope that you can take with you, because it really can transform your low end. My next tip is one that can be seen as being on the intersection between production and mixing, and it's simply to be working with your reverbs and your delays and your echoes in send channels instead of working independently on each stem. So let's jump back into the DAW and look at what I'm meaning. Let's now take a look at the loop that I created earlier and see what we can be doing with reverbs and delays on this one. So as you see in my send channels, I have a bunch of different ones. We have different reverbs, we got chorus, delay, and some other things that we're going into later. And instead of treating all the different stems separately with their own reverbs and their own echoes, which could make them feel a bit distant from each other, we instead pool everything together and send it to the same reverbs. And the effect we're getting from this is that it becomes like a glue to the mix. Let's, for example, look at the whole reverb. So let's solo this one and hear what we're having sent to that one. So we can hear that we're getting both some of the pads in the background, the plucks, and also a bit of the effects and some of the drums. We can see also the room reverbs if we look on that one. So here we're actually getting some of the bass, and we're having some of the pads and the more ambient effects happening. And what this will do is that it kind of places all of the elements in the same room. And this is really important to get a cohesive mix that sounds like one. Otherwise, it's very easy to get the results that it feels too dragged out. Another very important thing about using sends instead of working independently on each stem is to actually save some power for your computer. If you're working with a little bit of an older computer, it might be difficult with the CPU power if you're utilizing 10 or 11 different instances of, for example, an echo or a delay. The next tip is really in the same ballpark as what we just discussed, but I think this one deserves its own point. And I think it does so because I haven't seen so many producers using this type of method. So here it goes. Let's jump in and look at this one. So this is really all about utilizing overdrive on a separate send channel. And what this does is to give kind of an all-around saturation to the mix. So let's look at what is happening here on this send channel. So we have the Ableton stock plugin, the return overdrive, and then we're EQing away the sub, so we're not getting any introduction of frequencies happening there. And then we're simply sidechaining this to the kick. Let's give a listen to what is happening on the send channel right now. So we're hearing a bit of everything in the mix being sent to the send channel, and it kind of brings a bit of a distorted and fuzzy feeling to what is happening. And this is of course not meant to be fully transparent in the mix, but you then bring it in to the taste that you feel. So let's listen to the mix without this on, and then we'll A/B test and put this on. Hear quite a distinct difference in what is happening in the mix here. It becomes a bit more gelled together, and you also hear a bit more transparency in, for example, the percussion playing in the background. In the 7th tip, I want to talk about masking in the mid-range. And this happens because we're not really EQing properly in all of our different stems. So what happens when we're adding 10, 15, 20 different stems is that we're adding a bunch of different layers on the mid-range. But if we're not carefully controlling this with EQing properly so everything gets its own place in the 4D mixing space that we have, then you're gonna get a lot of buildup of mud and clutter in the mid-range. And this is very easily done by either when in production doing the ongoing mixing with just EQing properly according to what you want to achieve, or when you're going into the mixing stage, making sure that you're taking proper care of the mid-range and giving space for the things that are important for the song and taking away a lot on the things that are more complementary or secondary things in the mix. Tip number 8 is really an easy one, but it's still one that I see a lot of my students miss. And it's really to just high pass everything in the low end except from the bass and the kick. And of course, when I'm saying everything, you need to take caution so you're not doing this too aggressively and taking away some of the life in the song. But otherwise, you will have so much buildup of just rumble in the low end that is taking space without actually giving anything to the song. For example, we have a crash going in the beginning here. So what you can see there in the beginning is a lot of information happening in the sub 100s, but something that we will never hear. We can just EQ out so we only have this part and see what it is. Inaudible. And of course, for this only stem, it's not going to make a big difference for the overall track, but if this is happening on 15 or 20 different of your stems, you will have an issue. So what you should be doing is that on everything that isn't your kick or your bass, just high pass as much as you can without interfering with the actual sound. So we take away too much to begin with, and then we'll lower the high pass to the point where we don't hear any difference. So around there I think is fine. Now we've taken away everything under 300 Hz, but I'm still getting the information that I need from that stem. We can also look at another example, which is the pads that we have playing here. So let's just listen to this one and look at the EQ. Here we can see a lot of mud in the low end, and it's information that we don't want to be there. Because if we do the same as we did with the crash, and just do a low pass here, and listen to what is actually happening in the sub 100s, not much, but this will interfere with our kick and bass. So here we can take our high pass filter and basically take away everything above 200. And we've done no interference to the actual sound of the pad. So by doing this on all of the stems in your track when doing the mixing or already in the production stage, you're going to save a lot of headroom and also make sure that your low end will be much cleaner in the end. The next tip is also one of these really life-changing things that I don't really understand how I was even producing before I understood to start doing this. And it's to check your mono compatibility, both in the production stage, but also in the mixing stage. So it's quite simple to do. What you do is you take the utility from Ableton and put it on your master channel. Here I've called it the mono switch, which you can just do by renaming it to that. And in the utility you have the mono button, which you manually can push, but it's quite annoying to do that every time you want to switch. So what we instead do is that we go up to the key button and we manually assign a key to do this switching for us. Here I've put M as my switch. And what this does is that we very quickly and easily can check our mono stereo compatibility. So by taking away the stereo field when doing our mixing, we give more focus to our brain and to our ears to hear what we actually need to hear. So let's do just a quick A/B comparison here to check on this loop between the mono and the stereo. So it sounds good. Since we now have a reference track, you should actually utilize that one as well. So what we do is that we do the exactly same thing. We put our utility that we've put from before when we gain stage down to -12. We have the mono button, and we then do the exact same thing. We put the same trigger point, so M on this one as well, which means that when we are switching between mono and stereo on our loop, we're also switching between mono and stereo on the reference track. So let's just do that quickly to show. So by looking like that, we can very quickly compare and adjust accordingly with our reference track and making sure that we're hitting the same type of notes and still having the same power in mono as our reference track. My friends, we've reached the final tip, and this is also one that really changed the game for my mixes and really how loud I can get them. And it's to utilize soft clipping before going into your final limiter or into a mastering stage. What I usually do is that I put on a soft clipper on all of my groups. So for example, the kick and bass group, the drums, the synths, I treat them separately. And what I use is a plugin from Newfangled Audio, which is called Saturate. And I can really recommend this one. I really enjoy the simplicity of using this plugin. Put this output on auto, and let's just solo the drums group so we only hear that. So that is what's happening right now, nothing. But what we will be doing is cranking up the input, so we're pushing this into the soft clipper. And when that happens, we're gonna see this spike downwards, so we're dropping in dBs. So let's do that and see what happens. And then we'll also increase the drive a little bit. We'll push this in here. So what we can see is that we're hitting around -3 dB right now. We can say that this means that we're gaining 3 decibels in headroom for the final mix. And we can also see this in one more visual way. We can do that by checking the full volume of what is happening with the drums group. So we have here the Newfangled Audio plugin, and we'll turn that off for now, and we'll see what are we peaking at with the drums group before turning that on. So we peaked at -21.5. Let's turn that down and we'll put on Newfangled and we'll turn it again. And you see we're now peaking at 24.7 with no change to the sound and to the timbre of your actual stems. Then you will apply this to all of your groupings, so the kick and the bass, the drums, the synths, and you could be ending up with having 3-4 decibels more of headroom going into your master.
So a massive thanks to Gustaf for those fantastic mixing tips. There's actually a couple in there which even I didn't know, which I'm now implementing. Let us know in the comments which of these tips you're going to try for your music, and if you enjoyed this video, let Gustaf know by giving it a like, and please do subscribe to the channel if you found it useful. But of course there's more to mixing than just those 10 tips. I've put together my personal 14 favourite mixing tips, each of which made a huge difference in my mixing career, and I've compiled them into the video that's popping up right there, so be sure to check those out next. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you over in that next video.